And I've seen the collapse of our shellfisheries, a 99% collapse in our scallops and clams, the loss of 90% of our eelgrass, the loss of close to 90% of our salt marshes. And the science is crystal clear on all of this. The root cause of this is an overloading of nitrogen from land to sea, and that overloader of nitrogen is coming from wastewater. And
So here the speaker specifically mentions the collapse of the shell fisheries, including scallops and clams, the loss of eelgrass, and the loss of salt marsh. He then states that the cause of these problems is nitrogen from wastewater. So if we eliminate all the wastewater, we should solve the problem. But wait, didn't we do that already? We sewered the entire South Shore from Queens to Oakdale and removed all the wastewater discharges to groundwater. But removing all the septic systems did not solve the problem. Here we see a downward trend in the harvesting of clams in the Great South Bay over a 30-year period. Here we see the correlation of sewer construction and this downward trend and the occurrence of brown tide. Correlation does not prove cause and effect, but it does show that reducing nitrogen load by sewering did not help the shellfish industry.
Some questions. Legislator Flower had a question.
The sewering, which will help lower the nitrate problem that we have, is this going to help solve red tides and brown tides and everything else?
Yes, in fact, it will.
Contrary to what the speaker has said, here we see that sewering did not prevent the occurrence of brown tides or other harmful algae in the sewered areas. These sewers were installed over 40 years ago, and if anything, have had a detrimental effect on the ecosystem.
And it seems like places like Jamaica Bay, which has 50 times the nitrogen that Great South Bay has, or Peconic Bay roughly. 50 times.
Mm-hmm.
They're not having the same red and brown tide levels.
No, they're not.
All the places such as Peconic Bay, Sarasota Bay, Barnegat, Tampa, Great South Bay, Sarasota Bay, with all the red and brown tide, have some of the lowest nitrogen levels because of a lot of the sewering.
That's not true.
We already made a big mistake. We put the Southwest Sewer District in. And when we did that over 40 years ago, we started the downward spiral of losing everything that was dear to me. If we continue to go along the path of assuming we have too much nitrogen, because none of the data shows that, everything you look into the Peconic Estuary Program shows levels of nitrogen that are not only barely above the level of detection in the marine waters, they're going down. And Dr. Goldberg can't explain why. He has done experiments that went back to say, let's see what happens when we add nitrogen to our bay. And we put shellfish in there. In every one of those experiments, the shellfish grew faster. Our bays are not nitrogen limited. There's a term for it, oligotrophic, which is just a term, but essentially means they're starving.
Is nitrogen reduction, is that the silver bullet that's really going to fix this? I'm not saying we don't, maybe there's a lot of things we need to address with that. We have the nitrogen levels somewhat low, and I'm not saying we don't have other improvements, but it seems like they're happening worse in the areas that have lower nitrogen.
Legislator Flattering makes an important point here. In general, water bodies with low nitrogen loads appear to be more susceptible to having harmful algae blooms than water bodies with high nitrogen loads. In particular, we see Peconic Bay and the Great South Bay falling into the category of low nitrogen load with harmful algae blooms. On the other hand, we see Jamaica Bay with a nitrogen load over 50 times that of Peconic Bay, rarely experiencing harmful algae blooms.
The sewering, which will help lower the nitrate problem that we have, is this going to help solve red tides and brown tides and everything else?
Yes, in fact, it will. The studies have been done and have been very, very clear. And, the science is crystal clear on all of this. The root cause of this is an overloading of nitrogen. A lower amount of nitrogen loading has a longer amount of time to manifest itself in negative ecosystem impacts. So that nitrogen goes in, it stays around for a very long period of time. The other big looming gorilla in the room is climate change, right? Our bays I've seen it just in this century alone. Our bays are actually warming at 3 times the global average. There's only one lever we can pull to address this, and that's this plan here to reduce nitrogen loads, which we know will be effective.
What we do know is that lowering the nitrogen loads in the past has not been effective in the bays of Long Island. There are other steps that have to be considered. It is essential that we maintain the elevation of the groundwater table on the mainland to assure equilibrium of the freshwater flow to the bays and to moderate the water temperatures. And we must maintain adequate nutrient levels so our shellfish don't starve and the toxic algae do not gain an advantage over the beneficial algae. Reducing the nitrogen load is not the solution.
And, the science is crystal clear on all of this.